Virginia McCullough lived what seemed like an ordinary life in the quiet, picturesque town of Essex, England. The area was known for its peaceful streets, where neighbors greeted one another with friendly waves, and local shops bustled with the everyday rhythm of small-town life. Virginia's parents, John and Louis McCullough, had lived in their home on Pump Hill for over 2 decades, building a solid reputation as a kind and humble couple. John, who had once worked as an engineer, was a well-respected figure, often admired for his intelligence and hard-working nature. Louis, on the other hand, had been a stay-at-home mother, deeply involved in her children's lives and always eager to lend a helping hand to friends and neighbors. The McCulloughs were the kind of family everyone liked, and their absence did not go unnoticed. By 2020, friends and neighbors began to ask questions about the once visible couple who had suddenly disappeared from public view. The COVID-19 pandemic helped mask their absence, as it provided a perfect excuse for Virginia to say that her parents were avoiding contact to protect their health. After all, John suffered from multiple chronic health conditions, including diabetes, glaucoma, and hypertension, while Louis struggled with agoraphobia and anxiety. These ailments made it plausible that the couple would want to stay inside and avoid potential exposure to the virus. But as time passed, concerns grew. People began to wonder why John and Louis had completely vanished, especially given their need for medical care. The family physician, who had treated John and Louis for years, became particularly worried. Missed appointments and uncollected prescriptions raised red flags, and despite Virginia's assurances that her parents were simply taking time off or traveling, the doctor suspected something far more troubling was going on. By early 2023, the doctor had reached a breaking point. He could no longer accept Virginia's vague excuses. With no contact from John and Louis in nearly 4 years and their health conditions still unresolved, the doctor finally contacted the police. A missing persons investigation was launched, and soon officers arrived at the McCullough residence. Determined to find answers, the house itself was eerily quiet when officers first arrived. The curtains were drawn, and there were no obvious signs of life. Virginia answered the door, calm and composed, as though she had been expecting them. When the police questioned her about her parents' whereabouts, she offered a familiar story. Her parents were traveling and would return in October. However, this time, the police weren't convinced. The idea of 2 elderly people with chronic health issues traveling without their medication seemed implausible. After further questioning, Virginia's mask began to slip finally. She made a chilling confession. Her parents were dead, and they had been dead for 4 years. The officers, stunned by the revelation, immediately began searching the house. What they found inside would haunt them for years to come. Virginia McCullough had always been a mystery to those who knew her. As the youngest child of John and Louis, she had never quite found her footing in life. After a short stint working as a barmaid, she moved back in with her parents in 2017, ostensibly to help care for them as they aged. On the surface, it appeared that Virginia was a dutiful daughter, stepping in to manage her parents' declining health and finances. John's health had been deteriorating for some time. He suffered from high blood pressure, diabetes, and glaucoma, all of which required constant medical attention. Louis, while physically healthier, had her own struggles with severe anxiety and agoraphobia, conditions that made it difficult for her to leave the house. Virginia's return home seemed like a blessing. Her parents needed help, and she was there to provide it. But beneath this veneer of responsibility, Virginia was leading a very different life. What began as small financial missteps quickly spiraled into a web of deceit and theft. Without her parents' knowledge, Virginia began siphoning money from their accounts, using their savings and pensions to support her growing gambling habit. The one small amount she took from them soon turned into large sums, as Virginia found herself in deeper and deeper financial trouble. Her parents, oblivious to the extent of Virginia's betrayal, continued to trust her. They believed her when she told them that the bank had made an error, or that they were the victims of a financial scam. Virginia was a skilled liar, and she used her parents' trust to her advantage, manipulating them at every turn. She fabricated elaborate stories about police investigations and promised that their money would be returned soon. But in reality, she was living off their savings and spending lavishly on online gambling and other indulgences. By 2019, Virginia's financial situation had become dire. She was drowning in debt, and the lies she had spun were beginning to unravel. Her parents, once her greatest allies, were now becoming an obstacle. They were starting to ask more questions about their finances, and Virginia knew it was only a matter of time before her deception was fully uncovered. Faced with the looming threat of exposure and financial ruin, Virginia began to contemplate the unthinkable: murder. June 17, 2019, was a day that would forever mark the beginning of a horrific series of events in the McCullough household. Virginia had decided that she could no longer live under the constant fear of being discovered. Her solution was chilling in its simplicity. If her parents were dead, they could no longer question her, and she could continue to live off their money without interference. That evening, Virginia prepared a lethal cocktail of prescription drugs. John, who had always been compliant with his medication regimen, unknowingly consumed the drug drink Virginia had prepared for him. By morning, John was dead. His body lay lifeless in his bed, the result of a carefully planned and executed murder. Lewis, however, had not consumed enough of the drug drink to die. She awoke the next morning, completely unaware of what had happened to her husband in the adjacent room. But Virginia had no intention of letting her mother live. What followed was an act of unimaginable brutality. Arming herself with a hammer, Virginia entered her mother's room. Lewis was sitting in bed, listening to the radio, a peaceful moment that would soon be shattered. When Lewis saw Virginia approach with the hammer, she must have sensed something was terribly wrong. "What are you doing?" Lewis asked, her voice filled with confusion and fear. But Virginia offered no explanation. Without hesitation, she swung the hammer, striking her mother in the head. Lewis tried desperately to defend herself, raising her arms to block the blows. Her pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears as Virginia continued the assault. The hammer soon became too unwieldy for Virginia, who found the blood messy. In a cold, calculated move, she grabbed a kitchen knife and began stabbing her mother. 8 stab wounds to the neck, chest, and shoulders ended Lewis's life in a gruesome, bloody scene that would haunt investigators for years to come. After the murders, Virginia felt an eerie calm. She went about her day as if nothing had happened, even visiting the GP to seek treatment for a cut on her hand, a wound she had sustained while stabbing her mother. She lied to the doctor, claiming the injury was from chopping vegetables, all the while knowing that her parents lay dead at home. With her parents dead, Virginia's focus turned to concealment. She knew she had to act quickly to hide their bodies and maintain the facade that they were still alive. The next day, June 18, 2019, she went to the local town center and purchased supplies. Among the items she bought were sleeping bags, which she intended to use to wrap the bodies of her parents. She also bought breeze blocks and other materials to build a makeshift mausoleum in her home. Over the next several days, Virginia meticulously worked to conceal the crime. She placed her father's body inside a sleeping bag and entombed him in a structure made of masonry blocks. To further hide the evidence, she covered the mausoleum with blankets and paintings, turning it into what appeared to be a harmless pile of household items. Her mother's body was sealed in a wardrobe, taped shut, and later blocked with more breeze blocks. For the next 4 years, Virginia lived in the same house as her parents' decomposing bodies. To the outside world, she continued to maintain the illusion that they were alive and well. She sent text messages from their phones, pretending to be them, and even made phone calls to family members, using different SIM cards to impersonate her parents. When family members or friends inquired about John and Lewis, Virginia had ready-made excuses. She claimed they had moved to Clacton to avoid gossip, and when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, she used the lockdowns as a convenient excuse for their continued absence. She even went as far as sending postcards to neighbors, forging her parents' handwriting to make it seem like they were traveling. Virginia also continued to drain her parents' bank accounts. She collected their pension payments, cashed in on their retirement savings, and racked up additional credit card debt in their names. By the time she was arrested, she had stolen nearly £150,000 from her parents, using the money to fuel her gambling addiction and support her lavish lifestyle. As the years passed, Virginia's lies began to catch up with her. By 2023, the family physician, who had been treating John and Lewis for years, could no longer ignore the troubling signs. John and Lewis had missed multiple medical appointments, and their prescriptions hadn't been filled in over 3 years. The doctor, who had been trying to reach them for months, was met with vague excuses from Virginia, who claimed her parents were either traveling or too ill to leave the house. Eventually, the doctor grew suspicious and contacted the police. The initial missing persons investigation didn't raise any alarms. After all, Virginia claimed her parents were simply on vacation. But when the police looked deeper into the case, they found no evidence of John and Lewis traveling. Their medical conditions made it impossible for them to go anywhere without medication, and the fact that no one had seen them in years raised serious concerns. On September 15, 2023, the police obtained a search warrant and arrived at the McCullough home. Virginia, calm and collected as ever, opened the door and invited them in. She seemed unbothered by the presence of the officers, as though she had expected this day to come. When the officers asked where her parents were, Virginia finally admitted the truth. They were dead, and they had been dead for years. The police, after hearing Virginia's shocking confession, quickly moved through the McCullough home. The air was thick with tension as the officers cautiously stepped into the dimly lit rooms. Their flashlights swept over old family photos hanging on the walls, relics of what once seemed like a normal, loving family. But that illusion shattered with every step they took closer to the truth. The house, at first glance, appeared tidy but eerily empty of life. A thick layer of dust-covered furniture, and the air smelled stale, as if it had been undisturbed for years. The officers made their way to the master bedroom, where Virginia had coldly indicated her father's body could be found. What they discovered there was beyond anything they had imagined. In the corner of the room was what appeared to be a pile of household items, blankets, old paintings, and boxes stacked haphazardly. But underneath it all was a structure that would leave the officers haunted for days. Using masonry blocks, Virginia had built a makeshift mausoleum, entombing her father's body within its walls. The careful construction and effort that had gone into hiding the corpse were as chilling as the crime itself to John's body. Wrapped in a sleeping bag and encased in several layers of plastic, had been concealed there for over 4 years. The body was severely decomposed, and the stench of death permeated the room, an odor that had somehow been masked by Virginia's meticulous attention to detail. As the officers began to deconstruct the mausoleum, the horrific reality of the crime set in. The room, once a place of rest and peace, had been transformed into a tomb by Virginia's hand. But the horror didn't end there. In another room, they found Lewis's body hidden inside a wardrobe. The wardrobe had been taped shut and reinforced with breeze blocks, making it almost impenetrable. When the officers finally managed to open the wardrobe, they were confronted with the gruesome sight of Lewis's mummified remains. Wrapped in a sleeping bag, her body showed clear signs of the brutal violence that had ended her life. Defensive wounds on her hands and the deep stab wounds to her neck and chest. The sight of the bodies, concealed in such a cold and calculated manner, left the officers shaken. It wasn't just the murders that were horrifying. It was the fact that Virginia had lived in the house with the bodies for over 4 years, maintaining her normal life as if nothing had happened. Forensics teams were called in to gather evidence, and the police quickly took Virginia into custody for questioning. Virginia McCullough's arrest was as eerie and unsettling as the murders themselves. When the police placed her in handcuffs and read her rights, Virginia displayed little emotion. There were no tears, no protests of innocence, just a calm acceptance of her fate. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, knowing that eventually her web of lies would unravel. During the interrogation, Virginia's demeanor remained disturbingly composed. She sat across from the detectives, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face blank and expressionless. When asked why she had killed her parents, her response was chilling in its simplicity. They were in the way. She went on to explain that she had been living off their money and didn't want to lose her financial freedom. To her, her parents had become obstacles to her lavish lifestyle, and killing them was a necessary step to remove those obstacles. What struck the detectives most was Virginia's complete lack of remorse. She spoke of the murders as if she were recounting a mundane task, like doing the laundry or preparing dinner. When asked about her mother's last words, her desperate plea of "What are you doing?" Virginia shrugged, stating that she didn't feel anything in that moment. It was a cold, calculated crime, driven by greed and self-preservation. Throughout the interrogation, Virginia remained cooperative, answering every question without hesitation. She even provided the police with a detailed account of how she had concealed the bodies and maintained the illusion that her parents were still alive. When the detectives asked if she regretted her actions, Virginia simply replied, "No, it had to be done." Her detachment from the horror of her crimes left the detectives and psychologists who evaluated her deeply unsettled. One psychologist described Virginia's behavior as narcissistic and psychopathic, noting that she exhibited a complete lack of empathy and an obsessive need for control. Others pointed out that her obsessive-compulsive tendencies may have contributed to the way she meticulously planned and executed the concealment of the bodies. That Virginia's trial began in early October 2024, and it quickly became a media sensation. Journalists flocked to the courtroom, eager to report on the shocking details of the case. Headlines screamed of the cold-blooded killer who had murdered her parents and lived with their bodies for years. The public, already horrified by the crime, became fascinated by Virginia's detached demeanor and her lack of remorse inside the courtroom. Virginia sat quietly, her expression unchanged. As the prosecution laid out the evidence against her, detailing the gruesome murders and her years of deception, she remained emotionless, as if she were listening to a story that had nothing to do with her. The prosecution painted a damning picture of a woman driven by greed, who had seen her parents not as people to be loved and cared for, but as obstacles to be removed. Psychologists took the stand to discuss Virginia's mental state. They testified that she exhibited traits of both narcissistic personality disorder and psychopathy, which explained her lack of empathy and her ability to carry out the murders without remorse. However, they also made it clear that Virginia was fully aware of what she had done, and that her mental health issues did not absolve her of responsibility for her actions. The defense attempted to argue that Virginia's mental health conditions, including a diagnosis of autism, had played a significant role in her behavior. They suggested that her emotional detachment and obsessive-compulsive tendencies may have clouded her judgment, leading her to commit the murders without fully understanding the gravity of her actions. However, this argument did little to sway the jury, who were faced with the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and cold calculation. The prosecution pointed out that Virginia had planned the murders well in advance, drugging her father before brutally attacking her mother. They also highlighted the fact that she had lived with the bodies for over 4 years, continuing to deceive her family and friends while profiting from her parents' pensions. This level of planning and deceit, they argued, was not the result of a confused or mentally unstable person, but of a calculating killer. On October 11, 2024, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty of 2 counts of murder. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, called Virginia's actions chilling and heartless. He sentenced her to life in prison with a minimum term of 36 years, ensuring that she would spend the majority of her life behind bars. The aftermath of Virginia McCullough's crime sent shockwaves through her family and the wider community. Friends, neighbors, and relatives were left grappling with the unimaginable reality that someone they knew, someone who had been trusted to care for her elderly parents, could commit such a heinous act. During the trial, victim impact statements were read aloud, offering a glimpse into the devastation that Virginia's actions had caused. Lewis's brother, Richard, spoke of the profound loss he felt, not only for his sister and brother-in-law, but for the trust that had been shattered. "Virginia is dangerous," he stated. "Her ability to kill her parents undermines my faith in humanity." Richard's statement revealed the extent of the manipulation Virginia had employed over the years. She had used lies and false hope to convince her family that John and Lewis were still alive, sending text messages and postcards in their names to maintain the illusion. "I believed I was in communication with Lewis and John," Richard said, his voice shaking with emotion. "To find out they were dead all along. It's a living nightmare." Other relatives expressed similar feelings of disbelief and betrayal. They spoke of how Virginia's deception had torn their family apart, leaving them questioning whether they could have done something to prevent the tragedy. "I keep asking myself if I missed the signs," one family member said. "How could she have done this without any of us knowing? How could she live with their bodies for so long?" The emotional toll on the family was immense, with some relatives describing Virginia's actions as sickening and inhumane. The fact that she had not only killed her parents, but had also continued to live in the house with their bodies was almost too much to comprehend. The betrayal cut deep, leaving scars that would take years to heal, if they ever did. Neighbors, too, were left reeling from the discovery. Many had interacted with Virginia during the years following her parents' deaths, never suspecting that anything was amiss. "She seemed so normal," one neighbor said in an interview with a local news station. "We knew her parents were ill, but she told us they had moved away to avoid the gossip. We had no idea." The community struggled to come to terms with the fact that such a horrific crime had occurred in their quiet, suburban neighborhood. 4 months after the discovery, residents gathered at the local church to hold vigils for John and Lewis, lighting candles in their memory and praying for peace. The McCullough home, once a symbol of family and stability, became a grim reminder of the dark secrets that can lie hidden behind closed doors. The story of Virginia McCullough's cold-blooded murders continues to resonate, not only because of the horrific nature of the crimes, but also because of the many lessons it offers about the human psyche, mental health, and the consequences of unchecked greed. What led Virginia to commit such brutal acts? How could she live with the bodies of her parents for years without breaking down under the weight of guilt? Psychologists who studied the case pointed to Virginia's obsessive-compulsive tendencies and her lack of emotional attachment as key factors. But beyond the psychological explanations, there is a deeper question about the nature of evil itself. Virginia's actions were not driven by rage or hatred. There was no moment of passion that led to the murders. Instead, they were carefully planned and executed, motivated purely by financial gain and a desire for control. This cold detachment is what makes the case so disturbing. If this story has left you as shocked as it has us, and you want to hear more gripping and thought-provoking true crime stories, please like, share, and subscribe to True Crime Stories Unfold. By supporting our channel, you're helping us bring more stories of justice and the search for truth to light. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on our latest documentaries.